and welcome to Mandobug Crafts, episode 101. What's up, everybody? My name is Mandobug. You may also know me as Amanda, but I'm basically Mandobug everywhere on the internet. So you may know me as Mandobug more, well, better. So starting the show out with something I've learned. This week, I've done a little bit more, I've made more progress on weaving. So I told you guys last week that I got a small floor loom, a Dorset loom. I said it was 20 inches, but it's actually 22, like in full width, but I don't know that you could weave the full width. So I probably won't try to weave more than 20 inches. Right now, my project is only supposed to be 18 inches. I say supposed to be because I'm using a bulky weight yarn and the project calls for worsted weight. So I think mine's going to end up being a little wider than it's supposed to. I don't know enough about weaving to know that if I use a thicker yarn at the same, I don't remember what they call it, but I'm assuming I might get the same width, but just a denser fabric, but also it is thicker yarn, so I might get a bigger width. You weavers out there know what's going to happen. I'm just going to be pleasantly surprised. My biggest concern was if my bulky yarn was going to thread through my heddles, because that was the smallest hole that the yarn needs to go through. It was difficult to thread some of them because the yarn has to go through doubled, but it did go through and I think I'm going to be okay. I haven't actually gotten past that part yet. So that's what I learned this week is I wound my warp onto the back beam of the loom and then I started threading the heddles. So on a floor loom, you may have heard people talk about a rigid heddle loom. So those are some of the smaller table looms where the heddles don't move, they're fixed in place. The floor loom that I have, the heddles can move back and forth. And I actually have 4 different, I believe they're called shafts, 4 different shafts that the heddles hang on. So you can thread them in a certain order where when you press on the floor pedals, certain shafts lift and lift whatever threads of your warp that you threaded through that shaft. So the pattern that I'm following is part of Craftsy's floor loom weaving class. You warp 5 yards, so that's how long my project is, and 180 ends. So that's how many strands. It's supposed to be a 10 by 10, so it's supposed to be 18 inches. Like I said, I used bulky weight, so I'm hoping I end up with 18 inches. I'm not really sure what's gonna happen. But yeah, so I started threading the heddles. And I'm only halfway done because they're threaded in a pattern order so that we can weave some patterns. So it's a 4-3-2-1 descending order. So the first thread is pulled through shaft number 4, which is the one that's the furthest from you, and then 3-2-1. And then the 5th thread is going to be in that 4th shaft, and then the next 3-2-1. And so it's this descending 4-3-2-1 order, and I'm only 90 ends in. I mean, you can count to 180. You have to thread that twice, actually. So you thread the heddles, but then you also have to thread it through the reed, and so I haven't even gotten to that part yet. But I'm having a lot of fun. The Craftsy class is a lot of information. It's a lot to take in at once. It's such a big project. So these 5 yards, I'm going to be able to weave 3 sampler pillows with it. So it's a massive project for being my first weaving project, but it is, the Craftsy class is broken down so step by step that I don't ever feel lost. It just is like, this is a lot. This is a lot of information to be taking in. So it is good that I'm breaking it up upon several weeks. The biggest reason I'm doing that is because the loom is at my mother-in-law's next to her loom so that we can learn together. And so I'm only up there usually once a week, although I think I went up there twice this week because we're excited about the weaving. I think she's stayed a little bit ahead of me, which has been nice, so that she can help me when I show up. At this point, I believe she's actually already tied on to her apron rod, I believe it's called, the one in the front. She's threaded through her heddle, through her reed, and now onto the front bar, and she's actually done a couple practice weave rows. So I'm so ready to get to that point. So yeah, that's something I've learned this week, and I'm still learning. You can tell I'm still struggling a bit with the terminology, remembering exactly what everything's called. Moving on to finished objects. This week I had to focus a lot on finishing up custom orders for my Etsy shop, so I knit another Baa-ble Hat, which actually isn't, I don't have those listings up on Etsy. Those are ones that come in through friends of my mother-in-law's, but I can pop up a photo. It's just in the traditional blue and green colors, so I knit one of those this week. I also had to spin another hank of the Golden Doodle yarn. I think I referenced it, and maybe put some pictures in last week's video. So this is the 5th hank for this order that I've spun up. This is 50% merino. Forget that the way my lighting's set up, it's not helpful to get close. You get more shadows. This is 50% merino, 50% Golden Doodle fur, and the fur is not as soft as the merino, so the yarn doesn't turn out the softest. And if you really, really like rub on it, it does shed. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. I know you can see that. It will shed. So that is the one thing I've noticed with the dog fur yarn, especially if the fur, well, even if the fur's longer, the yarn tends to shed a tad. I could probably minimize that by fulling the yarn. I will experiment with that as I continue doing this order, but it does take quite a bit of abrasion for it to shed. So this hank is 68 grams and 63 yards, so it's not very often that you find a yarn that's heavier than the amount of yardage that is in the hank, unless it's like really, really thick. This yarn's about a Aran bulky weight, and that's heavy, right? You're not getting a lot of yield for your weight, but a lot of it has to do with the way that the fur behaves. So I've just been learning a lot, because with this order, she is a knitter and she wanted to knit a hat for her neighbor. This fur is from her neighbor's dog. It's his service dog. He became disabled and got a service dog, and the friendship between the two is just absolutely amazing, she said. And so she thought this would be a great gift for him. So I told her, you're probably only going to need 3 or 4 hanks, and I think I ended up sending her like 180 yards, but I guess because of some, I don't want to get too personal, his head is larger than the average person, so I spun her up one more hank and have yet to ship it out to her. So yes, and I don't know if I really talked much about the process of spinning these. I turn them into bats on my drum carder. The 50-50 I do by weight. So I weigh out the fiber, and then I weigh out the fur, and then I blend in very thin layers, wool, fur, wool, fur. Most often the fur has to go straight on the drum. For this one, I actually fed it through the drum carder because it was so short I couldn't hold it and feed it on. I mean, we're talking like 1/4 inch length in some areas, which is also part of the reason it was so difficult to spin. This fur was shaved off the dog, so some areas were longer, but most areas were short, and I found that the longer areas were a different type of fur, fur that was more coarse, so I chose to not include that in the spin. So it's very much like when you shear a sheep, there are areas of the sheep's fleece that you don't want. I mean, besides, the little... First word that came to mind was dingleberries. Tags? What, is that what they call them? I don't know. I just know them as dingleberries. So besides the little poo bits, there are just areas of the fleece that you don't want to use because they're not uniform with the rest of the fleece and they're not as nice. So same thing with dogs, you know. So far in my experience, the best thing has been hair that's been collected from brushing, and if you can separate the undercoat from the coarser outer coat on most breeds, that is also ideal. Which brings me to my next finished object, which is this husky hat. So I have had this for probably the longest out of all my orders, but it's required a lot of communication with the person ordering the item because this husky fur, it was definitely outer coarse coat and the customer wanted a soft scarf. Unfortunately, we know as knitters and crocheters, fiber artists, that you can't get any softer than your coarsest fiber in the yarn. So when you spin up the coarser outer hairs of a husky, you end up with a mohair-like effect. Well, here's some of my leftover hand spun, right? So you can see this is black merino with gray husky, and even though there's not much husky in it at all, the areas that have it, just, it fuzzes up. It fuzzes up when you ball it up, it fuzzes up when you knit it up, and it just has like this mohair effect, but it's not soft. And as you know, even mohair gives some people the prickle factor. You get this halo, and that is what you feel. It doesn't matter what's underneath it. You feel what's haloing out. So, you know, I spun a 50-50 husky merino blend that was super, like, just looked like a ball of fur. It wasn't very attractive. So then I spun another sample of 70-30, and I ended up mailing the samples out to the customer because I'm like, you need to feel this so you know if you do want a scarf out of this or not. So we ended up deciding on a hat after he got the samples and got to feel it. And that way we could line it. So also he was like, oh, let's do a little less dog fur. So I ended up doing a final spin of 80% black merino, 20% gray husky. And that ended up being like a Aran bulky weight as well. So I knitted up into this hat. He sent me a sample photo of this rolled brim slouchy beanie. So I just made the pattern up as I went. And then I got some really, really soft merino yarn. And I just knit the pattern again. The yarn was a little bit thinner. So knitting the exact same size made a perfect lining. Now because this is two hats in one, this hat is kind of heavy. But the whole point is he wanted a really, really warm hat for very snowy, cold weather. So this is going to be perfect. This also sheds just a little bit, but it does take quite a bit of abrasion. So again, I'm going to start experimenting with fulling the yarn a little bit to see if that traps some more of the hair in. Obviously some of it's trapped because it's spun in, but some of the fur, when it's being spun, only like the tips get trapped in. So, but I mean, if you think about it, when you buy yarn that has mohair and angora in it, sometimes those shed as well. Or even alpaca will shed. So it's not all that uncommon for your yarn to shed a little bit, depending on the fiber content. So that's the other one, and I'll go ahead and put it on for you. It's because of the lining, it's super soft inside. It's super warm, and then it's just got a little bit of a slouch. So that needs to be mailed out today. So those are all of my finished objects for the week. And oh, I was going to show you. So that sample hat that he sent me had a big pom-pom on it, and he's like, well, can you make a fur pom-pom? And I'm pretty sure that real fur pom-poms are made with pelts. I don't think that you can take brushings and create a pom-pom, to the best of my knowledge. So, you know, I said I can make a pom-pom out of the hand spun, but it's not going to look like the fur poms, which was in the sample photo. So I did. I made a pom-pom out of the hand spun, and it actually looks pretty cool, but it doesn't look like, you know, the fur pom-poms. But it didn't give the effect that he was going for, which I kind of figured, but I wanted to try, so I have a husky wool fur pom that I'm probably just gonna hold on to because I don't know what else to do with it. He doesn't want it. Alright, so moving to works in progress, I only worked on one personal project this week, and that was a pair of socks that I cast on. So these socks are called the Celestial Socks by Brandy Miller, and I cast on with cattails yarn in the Bear Lane. I believe it's Bear Lane. So, side note on the colorway of this yarn, Bear Lane, it's a name from the Wheel of Time series. I can actually show you how it's spelled, if the lighting will work for me. There it is. See it at the top there? Bear Lane? I kept saying Beryllian, which looking at it now, it's L-A-I-N, not I-A-N, but whatever. Bear Lane, I guess? It's a name from the Wheel of Time. Cat's yarn is, there's a lot of colorways named after Wheel of Time, and I know nothing about the Wheel of Time, so I finally have caved and I got the first book, The Eye of the World, on audio book, and I've started listening to it. Kind of bummed because I don't like the voice of the reader. He's got like a really deep husky voice, and I'm not super a fan of his style, but I think I can make it through. We'll see. But yes, Bear Lane on her Super Sparkle. Oh, maybe not. This looks like it has possibly the gold sparkle. The tag doesn't say. It just says 75% superwash merino, 20% nylon, 5% stellina, but there's no base name or color to the sparkle, but it looks like gold. Celestial Socks. So this adorable sock pattern has this little eyelet lace repeat across the toes that looks like little stars. Now the pattern is pretty simple, pretty easy to memorize with lace on every other row, and once you do one repeat, you know, it's not too bad, but for some reason I keep messing it up. I think what it is that because it's fingering weight, sometimes the yarn overs don't really pop the way that I expect them to, so I think that I missed one and I rip back, but if I keep going, it turns out it's fine. Although one of my socks, the stitch count was off, and I tried to fix it, and then that ruined the motif, and I had to rip back. And so then when it was off, I just kept it, and sometimes it fixed itself, and sometimes it didn't. That's what I get for trying to knit a patterned sock while, you know, holding a conversation or, you know, just doing other things, trying to pay attention to something else as well. So, so far, I've been able to make it work and not look silly, and also, I'm like double wrapping the yarn around my hand that holds the yarn to try to get a really nice tight sock gauge, because I've become such a loose knitter that on 000s I'm still not getting a really good gauge. So double wrapping the yarn has been helping a ton, and I'm really excited about this gauge. I went for the 64 stitch sock because at least 8 stitches to the inch, these should fit really well, but I've been definitely knitting a lot looser than that, so 64 stitch socks haven't been fitting me. So I'm really excited about these. There's a really cute motif on the back, so there's the stars all the way up the front, but when you get to the back of the leg, there's a little crescent moon, so I think these are going to be really cute. But that's the only personal project I've actually worked on. It feels good to get all of the orders done, because now I'm all caught up. No current orders. That feels good. Oh, I have the pattern printed right here. Not that my lighting's good enough for you to see it. Moving on to design time. So exciting. I have this, which is nothing. I cast on, I think I told you guys last week that I wanted to do a Knit One Purl One rib for this hat, but I cast on and realized, I wasn't all into that Knit One Purl One. It wasn't super exciting for a hat. So I decided to start designing something. So I played around on Stitch Fiddle with, I've used Stitch Fiddle before for charting crochet patterns, but they also have knitting features as well. So I hopped on over to their little knitting chart maker and started playing around with some cables and did a little swatch, but I wanted to change it, so changed it up again and then started knitting that. Then realized that I didn't want everything so busy in between the cables. So you'll see in a lot of cabled patterns there's purl bumps surrounding the cables because the purls kind of recede into the background, which pushes the knit cables forward. I had more of a busier pattern in between the cables, which made them get lost. So I decided to just scrap that and just do nothing but purls in between the cables to really help them stand out. I just haven't knitted up yet. So I've got the chart all made. I just need to do the knitting. Like I said, I found for me, designing, I have to make the pattern first and then follow it. And so at least I'm starting to get the hang of it. I've got the pattern and now I'm following it. Well, will be following it. So that also makes this my first knit design, which is crazy. I have been crocheting for so long, since I was 9, which is, wow, 20 years. I mean, not straight, but I've had a decent amount of knowledge for that long. So I've always felt more comfortable in crochet, designing in crochet. I just understand the construction. But knitting, I've only been knitting for 5 years. I started knitting at the beginning of these videos. And so I was always intimidated by designing a knit pattern because I didn't really understand the construction. I hadn't really followed enough patterns to really get what was going on. But I guess now I'm feeling a bit more confident, so that's really exciting. Moving on to Let's Chat. Yeah, not much going on with me this week. I have just been trying to plan and organize, and as well as you can tell, I'm back for another video, so the planning and executing is going pretty well of my goals. And I started listening to the Wheel of Time, which I mentioned earlier. I'm not very far at all. And it's funny because I'm listening to it, I don't know how anybody's name is spelt. One of the main characters that's being mentioned right now is Randall Thor, and I know that Kat sent me a colorway inspired by him, I think. You know, I'm gonna have to go through it. I got a bunch of minis when she was first dying, like these. These, though, where's the tag? These are actually Moraine Sedai, who also I think is mentioned in the beginning of the book. I'm at the part where they're at a festival, Beltane, and they're just kind of introducing a couple characters. So I'm like, oh, I've heard that name or read that name. So I'm excited to understand the fandom behind this because I've heard really great things about the book series. It's long. It's very long. This audiobook's 30 hours, and there's like 14, 15 books. I guess it depends on if you count the prequel. I still don't know enough about it. But, I mean, really, that's all I've been doing. So, I'm going to leave it at that. And hopefully, I can continue the schedule. And I will see you guys next week. Happy crafting! Bye!